In this podcast, I'd like to talk a bit about how to be with the dying and those who love them. Some of this material is going to be very challenging for you as healthcare providers because you have so many other things to do with other patients that you can't give the dying patient and his or her family the kind of time that you would like to. So some of this can be done by chaplains, some of it can be done by clergy, and I give them this talk too. But to the extent that you are able to do these things, and clearly you can't do all of them in your professional role, perhaps if it's a friend or family member you can, but in your professional role you'll find it possible to do some of these things. As many of them as you can will be helpful to the family and to the dying person. First of all, we need to say that there's no right way to do this. There are no magic formulas. Each case is different. You can't go in there with a plan. Like in wartime, every plan only survives to the point of the first encounter with the enemy, and then it's gone. So there's no right way to do it, and you don't need to feel like you've blown it if you don't do it according to the ways that I'm suggesting here. Also, we need to say that there are no stages. Even though Elizabeth Kubler-Ross made a groundbreaking contribution with her book on death and dying, in which she cataloged various stages that the dying and their families go through, she didn't mean that the stages should be considered rigid and that people pass the boundaries of one stage into the next and from that stage on to the next one. The reality is that they return to previous stages, they skip around, they spend part of their time here and part of their time there, and it might be best to say that instead of stages there are experiences that the dying pass through and that their families and loved ones pass through with them. And these experiences do look a lot like stages, but they're not properly stages in the sense in which one moves on from one to the next. So before death takes place, the most important rule, I think, is simply to be there. It's the ministry of presence. It's just show up. Like Irma Bombeck said, half of life is just showing up. And that's certainly true in ministering to the dying and to their families. Just to be there means a lot. Just to show your face, even if you don't say anything, says, I care, I'm with you. A corollary of this is that it's important to listen more than you talk. It's important to follow the patient's agenda. And you can't do that unless you listen. Some people go into a deathbed situation and they have an agenda, some things that they want to talk about, some things that they want to get through, and that's generally not helpful. You have to listen carefully and listen deeply. Listen to something more than just the words that are being said. Listen to the tone, listen to the silence. Look for emotion and attempt to discern what the patient's agenda is. Sometimes the patient wants to talk, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes she wants to talk about what it's like to die, sometimes she doesn't. Sometimes they want medical information, sometimes they don't. So follow the patient's agenda. Be very careful not to follow your own. In chaplaincy training, clinical pastoral education, chaplains and pastors are taught how to listen for the patient's agenda, and the supervisor is really good at dinging them if they in fact impose their own agenda. So again, develop the skill. Be very careful about listening and following the patient's agenda. If you find that dialogue with the dying person is difficult, and it often will be, look for clues. Look for clues about family, friends, and their support system. Look around. Are there cards? Are there balloons? Are there flowers? Are there handprints made by little children, perhaps grandchildren, perhaps a child, a young child that's going to be left in the home when mommy or daddy's gone? Look for clues about their friends and their support system. Is there, for example, a big flower arrangement from their local congregation? That says a lot, and it can provide the grist for some meaningful conversation. Tell me about your daughter. I see you have a lot of friends. Again, follow the patient's agenda. If they don't want to talk, don't force it, but you can give invitations. Also, before death takes place, one thing that you need to remember, never say, "I know how you feel." That one is one that dying people sometimes react to quite violently with things like, "No, you don't know how I feel. You've never died. You don't know how I feel. You've never been me." Don't do that one, even if you yourself have been through a life-threatening illness. Another principle, always ask, never assume anything. What might make perfect sense to you if you were in that patient's place may not be at all what they want. So always ask. There's nothing wrong with asking. Help the patient clarify whether it is death or whether it's dying that is the most problematic or fearful. These are two distinct things. Sometimes people, once they've had a chance to clarify it, will say, I'm really not afraid of death. Being dead doesn't hold any horrors for me, but I'm scared to death of dying. I don't want to feel pain. I don't want to be left alone. Sometimes patients will turn it around and they'll say, I can take the dying, but I just don't know what it's going to be like to be dead. What is it going to be like? I don't know what lies on the other side, and it's scaring me to death. Listen for clues that the person wants to talk about death planning. They may want to talk about making plans for their funeral. They may want to talk about care for their children. They may want to talk about scholarships or loans. They may want to talk about finances. They may want to talk about a living will or what's going to happen if they lose consciousness, who's going to make decisions for them. So listen for clues about that. Once again, it's about discerning the patient's agenda. And one of the things that I would say is tremendously important if you're going to minister to people who are dying, and that is to get comfortable with your own mortality. We've spent a lot of time in this class helping ourselves understand that we are mortal and what that's like, and to come to grips with the reality that we too will die someday. You have to be comfortable with that and not be scared to death by the thought of your own death in order to help somebody else. You can radiate peace and you can radiate confidence, and the dying will pick it up and it will be a comfort to them. On the other hand, if you're anxious about your own mortality, it's probably better not to get involved with ministry to the dying, because you will radiate your own anxieties and they will pick them up and add them to their own. During death, when death is actively taking place and the person is actively in the process of dying, once again, the most important rule is to be there. Show up. It's hard, it's unpleasant, nobody likes to do it, but just showing up says to the dying person, you're not alone, you're not forgotten. I care about you, we will remember you, your life does count. And of course it says to their family and to their friends the same kinds of things. Serve. Maybe you can pass a box of Kleenex, get somebody a cup of coffee, rub the dying person's feet, close the door, ask housekeeping to come back later, whatever it might be that is serving loving ministry to the family and to the dying person. Don't be afraid to touch, holding the dying person's hand, gently massaging their feet, gently stroking their forehead, just putting a hand on their head. Those things are tremendously meaningful. They say to the dying person, I'm still here, I haven't gone, people are with me, I'm not alone. And those messages get through. Don't be afraid to talk, but don't jabber. By talk, I mean say things to the dying person like, I'm here, your mom's here, you have a lot of friends standing around the bed. Clearly there are a lot of people who love you. God will never forget you. He promised that, yea, though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we need fear no evil because he's with us. Don't jabber. Don't be afraid of silence. But sometimes it's necessary to talk with comforting words in order for the dying person to know that you are there and that life is going on and that he's still a part of it. Also during death, you can arrange time for those who need it. Maybe there's a child that needs to come in and spend some time with grandpa. And you can make that happen, whereas it might not happen because other members of the family might be grieving their own grief about grandpa. And that little child will never get that opportunity unless somebody notices that that's important and arranges it. You can offer to pray if they want. If you know this person and you know that prayer has been a comfort to them, you can put your hand on their head and hold their hand, or gather the family around the bed and hold hands and offer a prayer that God will help this person, that God will comfort this person, that God will be with his and her loved ones. Prayer can be tremendously meaningful at the point of death. Also, you are aware as a healthcare provider and somebody who knows this, that there are many unpleasant things that happen, that may happen at the time of death. Sometimes breathing becomes very stertorous and tortured, and the family doesn't understand. They think that their loved one is suffering and gasping for breath, and it's like torture to them. And it's important to explain to them that they aren't aware of this, and that this is a very common thing that happens at the time of death. Fluid in the trachea, fluid in the lungs, gurgling sounds. I remember one time standing with a family around the bed of a young man who was dying of leukemia, and suddenly he flooded the bed with stool, dark, black, bloody stool from bleeding into his bowel, and it flooded the bed and dripped off the bed onto the floor. And the family was horrified. What is that? And I lied. I said, that's oil from the raising and lowering mechanism of the bed. I'll get the nurse to come and clean it up. I don't know whether lying is the right thing to do at that point, but with minutes left in this person's life, I didn't want them to envision what was going on under the covers and inside the skin. And the nurses came in. I told them what I'd done. They very graciously cleaned up and changed linen and let the family have their time with the dying patient again. Just be aware that unpleasant things may happen, and lay people are not prepared for those things, and you can help to smooth that out. After death, guess what? Once again, be there. It is so important simply to be there. And once again, serve. Arrange the door, arrange the curtains, remind them that they need to eat something. They may have been fasting for hours while standing by the deathbed of this person who's dying. Now this person is dead. They need to take care of themselves as well. Remind them to eat something right away before maybe even they leave the hospital or the hospice. Don't expect them to do much in the way of cognitive functioning at that point. They are in shock. They're still in the throes of denial. They are victims of an amygdala hijacking, and their cognitive functions are not working real well. They won't remember things. So don't bother telling them things. If you do tell them things, write them down. Give them the paper. They will probably not remember even that they had the paper, but that's better than expecting them to remember things. Ask them what they are tentatively planning for the next 24 hours so that you can get some idea of where they're going to go from here, and also kind of assess what level of emotional shock they might be in at that point. Also, if you possibly can, stay with them until they leave the hospital. They may have come into the hospital with their loved one walking under his own power, smelling of aftershave, and everything's fine, and now they're walking out of the hospital with a plastic bag containing his clothing and his eyeglasses and their memories. And if you can walk them to the parking lot and see them into their car, that helps so much. Someone said the loneliest journey in the world is the journey from the exit door of the hospital to the car in the parking lot after a loved one has died. Assess their ability to drive. You or someone else may have to drive them home. They simply may not be able to do it. If it's possible, and again, I know this goes way beyond your role as a healthcare provider, somebody really should walk them into the empty house. This may be the first time they have come into this house without their husband, their wife, their father, that child. If somebody can be there to help them to make that transition, that's a real ministry. And continue to be there for them. All the family will be there. Then there'll come the funeral, the memorial service. Relatives will come from out of town. Friends and family and church members will provide casseroles for them and bring them lunch and dinner. Then there will come a time when all the out-of-town guests have gone home and they're alone. They're alone in this house that they shared with somebody for maybe 50 years. And her clothes are still hanging in the closet, and the bed's still got a depression on the side where they used to sleep. And they just desperately need someone to be there for them after the crowds have gone away. And plan on giving the person who is grieving, if you can do it, about 10 hours of your listening ear. Look at old photo albums with them. Help them if they want to go through closets and get rid of clothes. Just sit and listen to stories. It takes about 10 hours of somebody's listening time for a person to get on the road to healing after a significant loss.